Member for Castres Office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am hoping that we are going to meet once again before the end of the year, so I can extend special greetings to my constituents and the people of St. Lucia, but in the event we don't, I would like to take this opportunity to do so. We are going into the holiday season very soon. I join my voice in welcoming our students from Sir Arthur Lewis Community College here this morning. And Mr. Speaker, I sat here wondering what was happening in the house this morning. Because one of the challenges that we've had with politicians, Mr. Speaker, is consistency. And when we are inconsistent in what we say, what we do, when we say it, because it depends on which side of the house we are sitting on, then that is what influences our thinking much more than a position, a conviction, or a belief. And Mr. Speaker, I can take my speech of 2015 when I was in opposition, and I can read this speech on the Millennium Heights Act that was introduced to this parliament, and it would remain relevant. I am amazed, Mr. Speaker, at the members opposite today. Because what are we looking at, Mr. Speaker? We are looking at a simple amendment to correct something that is not possible and admitted by the very leader of the opposition. He said the daily paid workers can neither be transferred nor seconded. So I wonder how he would explain to me when he passed the act of 2015 that said that the workers would be either seconded or transferred. Mr. Speaker, you see, he said the established workers and the non-established workers. So then in 2015, when they were passing this piece of resolution, the daily paid workers or the non-established workers were not important because they are featured nowhere in the bill. Neither can they be transferred, nor can they be seconded. Did he give an explanation in the House, Mr. Speaker, for what would have happened to these workers? But all of a sudden, he wakes up this morning and he realizes that something is going to happen to these workers. And how absurd, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite can come. I will come to what I said about it. I will come. And that is why this government is fixing what they did, Mr. Speaker. That is all this is about, you know. The amendment, Mr. Speaker. The amendment you cannot transfer. How can you transfer a public officer to a private entity? So all of a sudden we made, what I'm hearing opposite, Mr. Speaker, is we made OKEU a private entity. So the act that was passed in 2015, who passed the act? Who was in government in 2015 when this act, and all we are doing is changing one definition in there. And the members opposite have forgotten what they did, because when they sit on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, they get amnesia about government and what they did when they were in government. But you see, when you are not consistent And when you don't speak the truth about things, you forget what you said at some point and you give a different version. And that is exactly what is happening in the house today. So I will go to my speech and I will read. Mr. Speaker, I am quoting from my speech from Hansa. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned about this because I see this bill, but I do not see the overall health plan. Now that is what I said in 2015. The same opposition who today wants to advise the government on what should happen in health, how it should happen in health, and how we should roll out the program. The member for Denrino, he was in the house. They debated in support of the bill. I raised questions. And as I said, I could read that speech from start to finish, and it would be relevant. But I have chosen special parts of the bill just to highlight. I am not one of those who stand there and expect that share or not to be part of the shared cost. At the end of the day, I am not one who would stand and expect that government will pay all the medical bills. That was my statement in opposition. That we all knew that the cost of healthcare was not something that could be met entirely by government alone. That's a reality. I was not afraid to say it in opposition. What question did you ask?
Honorable member, continue, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I want to answer the member for Castries. The member for Castries is asked, can you second from government to a private entity? And I say categorically no. That is why we are here. You can second, no. You cannot transfer. You can second. You can second.
Honorable member, speak for the chair and continue your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will continue. But we would, listen to this, Mr. Speaker, but we would need to know, given the present situation that we are in, Mr. Speaker, where we stand. Because as members and representatives of constituencies, when I go back to my constituency and I walk in the area where there is somebody who is not so well off financially, they will ask the question, this new system that you passed in the House, how is it going to impact me financially? And I challenge any member opposite, through you, Mr. Speaker, to show when once in this House they indicated to the people of St. Lucia what it would cost to run the new health facility. You had consultants. Did you ever come and tell the people of St. Lucia how you would fund the project? Mr. Speaker, I continue because I have tried to maintain consistency. When I'm in opposition, I don't sing a song because I want to get into government, and when I get into government, I forget it, like we see over there. So when we look at the structure, we have to be concerned about cost, because everything comes down to the cost at the end of the day. And because of this, I was hoping that we would have had a little more time to consult. You heard that? Today they want to lecture us about time to consult. But when we ask basic questions, no answer. As Mr. James said, with the average people who will be affected by this new structure, I have very little information to speak to other than what is in the bill. What is new, Mr. Speaker? Their bill, you know, Mr. Speaker. They are the ones who are in government. They are the ones who passed the bill. And all we are making is a simple amendment to the bill to correct what they put in the bill that could not happen. How difficult is that for the average person to understand? If you cannot transfer a public servant from a government entity to a private entity, what are you required to do? You are required to second this worker. When you second a worker, you guarantee them their tenure of office. They are entitled to all of the benefits. And I remember asking, but I will come to it because the bill has it, Mr. Speaker, that the absolute authority to hire and to fire was that of the board. The board that they passed, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite, when they were in government, the board that they passed had the absolute authority to hire and to fire. Okay? So, and you know how we were able to appoint the chairman of the board? By the very legislation that you passed. And in my speech it is there. When you give politicians authority, they use it. So I raise the issue of SLASPA. It's in my speech. And I said the position of SLASPA is by designation. The permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. The members opposite, including the leader of the opposition and the former Prime Minister member for Beaufort South, the member for Dennery North, and the member for Labrie, all four-seated opposition today, was part of the government when they passed the bill. And I raised the concern, Mr. Speaker. The then Minister of Health from Babono, I said, why are we giving that authority to the minister? To be the one to engage the chairman of the board, and the board has absolute authority to make the decision. I have very little information to speak about other than what's in the bill, because based on the presentation by the parliamentary representative for Babono, I was hoping to get explanations for a lot of things that may not have been contained in the bill as to why we are moving in this direction. So, Mr. Speaker, I am hoping that we will reconsider and maybe take a little more time, because the health service for every St. Lucian will be impacted. And that is why I am not going to deal with this thing from a political standpoint. I am going to deal with it purely on the basis of what I see and how it is going to impact us. You know how bad it was back then, Mr. Speaker? They have changed the bill. And they brought it to the House. And what I had to debate was still the old copy. I never got the new copy when we came to the debate. And the then member for Beaufort South said to me, well, nothing much has changed. So all my quotations in my speech was based on the old act, and the pages had changed. You see, Mr. Speaker, yes, the numbering of the pages. So when I quoted page 13, it may have appeared on page 14 in the new act, because they came in to debate something in the House. They had the copy, but the members opposite did not have the revised copy. That is what happened, and it's in my speech. You see, Mr. Speaker, we can always, it's in Hansard. Only me remember that, because I'm consistent. The difference with you is you're not consistent. So you can't remember what you said. Mr. Speaker, I move on. Mr. Speaker, let's take section 4. Composition of the board. Remember, I'm quoting from my speech. I'm quoting from my
Honorable Member, I'm not saying don't quote from your speech, but I do not want, like I tried earlier, to take it too far. So continue there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take section 4, composition of the board. Now, like Mr. James, I have to use the old one, because that is the one I have, that is what I have worked with. I heard the member for Viewport South say that changes in the new one are minimal, so it does not really impact what is being discussed there. I told you it's in Hansard. I said, Mr. Speaker, it is there. It is in the record of SaintLucia. You think I was making up a story? If I go to section 4, and I am just looking for clarification, section 4 speaks about composition of the board. The board consists of no less than 8 persons and no more than 10 persons. I made a form. I said if you wanted to say 9 members should make up the board, 9 members should make up the board. If you say not less than 8 and no more than 10, the only odd number between 8 and 10 is 9. So you could have just said the board is made up of 9 members. It's in my speech, Mr. Speaker. You see, but members opposite forget that you are not always in authority. So let me go to the more substantial matters of that bill that was passed. Because, Mr. Speaker, all we are trying to do is to correct an anomaly. Mr. Speaker, I move on to page 12. On page 12, it speaks about the various functions of the board. What the board shall do and what it shall not do. And I make particular reference to H. Employ, discipline, terminate staff as required. See what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker? So the board that they passed have the full authority to employ, to discipline, and to terminate staff. But today, you hear all kinds of allegations as if we were the ones who introduced some kind of bill that is going to impact the employees of Victoria Hospital and other persons in the health sector. Mr. Speaker, I just explained to the member for Castries East. I know he's a bit confused these days because he don't know if he's the leader or if he's not the leader, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I just said H in the functions of the board in the Principal Act says they shall employ, discipline, and terminate. And he's still asking me where is it? Mr. Speaker, he's still asking me where it is. It is in H of the Principal Act that you passed. That is where it is, in H. Now, Mr. Speaker, I was hoping that I would have some explanation in relation to the transition from the present structure of government employees through the public service and how this transition will be facilitated in the new structure. And that is what we are fixing here. Mr. Speaker, I asked them the question in 2015. They left office in June of 2016, and I challenge any one of them to show me anywhere they ever answered that question. Mr. Speaker, I will come to that because the section that speaks to it is still a bit confusing to me because it speaks about secondment and of other persons, but I will come to that as I go along. I am just raising the concern based on the responsibility of the board. And I want to know whether these persons being spoken about here are persons who are presently permanent employees of government of St. Lucia through the various sectors of the public service. That's why I tell you, Mr. Speaker, I can just read the speech. Don't pretend like you all have amnesia in the house. Mr. Speaker, we are the legislators. We cannot pass laws when we in government that we are afraid of when we are in opposition. There must be consistency in government. The laws that you pass today, you should not be afraid of it tomorrow. And so, Mr. Speaker, when the members come and try to make it look like we have some ulterior motive for privatizing OKEU, you are the one who put a statutory board that has already privatized it. We didn't need your help. We tried to advise you on it. But you didn't want to take our advice. Here's what I ask, Mr. Speaker. Are we going to terminate the employment of those persons and get them attached to the new institution as new employees? And will they be under the sole control of the board in terms of the employment status and whether they remain employed or not? Because remember, the point was that the board has the sole authority to employ, to hire, to fire. I ask these questions because I have these concerns. Now, Mr. Speaker, the real government of this country is in office. And the real government is fixing this problem by giving the guarantee to all the employees who are under the public service structure that their tenure of employment is guaranteed because they are going to be seconded, but all of their benefits are going to be protected. The board solely cannot fire them at will. The board may say, I will return, or I no longer need your services. You can go back to your main employer. You didn't answer it when I asked. Today you want to answer it? Mr. Speaker, I have not seen the transition plan. So today we are hearing the member saying that there was a transition plan, that a consultant had been hired, and that the government is discussed. I asked back in 2015, where is the transition plan from VH to OKEU? You know what the transition plan was, Mr. Speaker? A naming ceremony, where they spent over $100,000 to place a plaque on the hospital and fake advertisement. A calendar showing the MRI machine working, persons getting, and you know how much they paid for the calendar? Thousands of dollars, Mr. Speaker. For somebody to act as if they were getting an MRI, as if they were getting services, and people still have the calendars at their homes, Mr. Speaker. That is what we got from the opposition. A 649, Mr. Speaker. That is what they gave us for OKEU, and all of a sudden they have become experts on advising this government on how to handle healthcare. Mr. Speaker, I have concerns about what will happen to the workers and how the transition will be facilitated. Who is going to be responsible and what is the arrangement? Because if the board is fully responsible for the complex, I also need to ask, will the size of the Ministry of Health be reduced? These were legitimate concerns back then. Because there was no plan. They never had a plan because they are not successful in anything that they do, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to take my whole time and read this whole speech. But I think, Mr. Speaker, I will request of one of the papers, or I will put that speech online, that anybody can go and read my contribution towards the debate in 2015, when the members opposite tried to put wool over the eyes of the people of St. Lucia into making them believe that OKEU was ready. And it is this government that have not opened the hospital. Mr. Speaker, if you cannot transfer workers, as the member, I could not believe the member for Castries East and leader of the opposition was saying that the workers can neither be transferred, that's the temporary workers, neither be transferred nor seconded. And he still sat in the parliament and passed a bill that the only two provisions made there was transfer and second. And today he is asking me what to do with the workers. I can assure you, the workers will be well taken care of under this government. There's going to be an increase in employment, not a decrease in employment at OKEU. So when the transition is fully made, and then they attack the issue of a consultant. But I am happy that the member for Castries Central was able to answer them. Because then again, they were in government, Mr. Speaker. They hired consultants. It was okay for them to hire consultants. But once it is the United Workers' Party government that employ consultants, it's a crime. Mr. Speaker, if they want me to tell them about consultants, I can tell them about these. I can tell them about all the consultants that they hired. But Mr. Speaker, the issue of healthcare is more important than our political bickering. Because some people are power hungry to do what they cannot do. So they try to use health. No, not only me. There's a team. You see, Mr. Speaker, we have a team of capable men and women. And the task has been difficult. Being able to move into OKEU has been a challenge because there was no plan, there was no financing. So I want to ask the member for Beaufort South. I know he will speak after me. So I want to ask him, Mr. Speaker. I know that I'm the fuel that burns in your combustion. So,
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, when this piece of legislation was passed, didn't the members opposite understand, and spearheaded by the member for Beaufort South, that they could not transfer the public servants? And I want them to tell me what is wrong with the amendment that is being proposed. Because the amendment is simple. Recognizing that there was also an instance where personnel may have to be retained or transitioned from the public service to take up duty at the medical complex, provision was also made for the transfer or secondment of a public officer or the service of the board. The service of the board and the preservation of the officer's position. However, Mr. Speaker, here's the point. However, based on the Pensions Act, The use of the word transfer considers the movement of a public officer from one department or ministry to another within the structure of the public service. And what was done with the Millennium Heights Act in putting the OKEU, the Wellness Center, and the Turning Point under a single entity, which is a statutory structure it's quasi-government. It's not officially government. So, Mr. Speaker, all we are doing is making the correction. And I have heard all kinds of insinuations by members opposite is because we want to privatize the hospital, so we are setting a platform to be able to do so. Mr. Speaker, they are the ones who passed the act. Additionally, the act also makes general reference to who has the power to second a public service to the service of the board of the Millennium Heights. In order to cure, this is what I'm saying, in order to cure the inconsistency or the ambiguity which arises from the aforementioned, the bill therefore seeks to amend the act by firstly deleting any reference to transfer of a public officer. That is all we are attempting to do. The act makes reference to transfer of a public officer, which is contrary to what is established in the Pensions Act. So the bright lawyers on the other side, Mr. Speaker, who always want to tell us what to do when we pass in a piece of legislation, they cannot advise themselves. They have to hire lawyers from Dominica to defend them. But you see, Mr. Speaker, they want to tell us that we cannot hire consultants. I don't need lawyers to defend me. I don't need lawyers to defend me yet. I don't need them to defend me yet.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, I will repeat what I said there for the benefit of the member for Castries East, who keeps on asking me, what are you doing? In order to cure the inconsistency and ambiguity which arises from the aforementioned, the bill therefore seeks to amend the act by firstly deleting any reference to the transfer of a public officer to the Millennium Heights Medical Complex, and also to make reference to the secondment of the public officer. So we are doing two things. There are places in the Act where it speaks about transfer of a public officer which is inconsistent with the law. So we are correcting that. And where that occurs, you would be dealing with it from the standpoint that all of these public officers would be seconded. I don't know what language. I have to speak again for the member for Castries East to understand what I have said there. Secondly, the bill seeks to make clear which entity has the power to second a public officer to the service of the board of the Millennium Heights Complex, namely the Public Service Commission, the Teaching Service Commission, or the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, as the case may be. Mr. Speaker, I rest my case. It is very clear that this government is the one making the right decision by fixing what needed to be fixed, so that all public officers, nurses, whoever they are, who are employed by the public service in St. Lucia, that their tenure is well covered and well protected under the structure of the Millennium Heights medical complex. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.